Shalom Israel, this is Will and Larry. In this video, we're going to prove that the Apocrypha is a part of the Bible. What is the Apocrypha? Here's the definition of the Apocrypha online. Let's read the first paragraph of what Wikipedia states about the Apocrypha. The biblical Apocrypha, from the Greek apokryphos, meaning hidden, denotes the collection of ancient books found in some editions of the Bible in a separate section between the Old and New Testaments, or as an appendix after the New Testament. Although the term Apocrypha had been in use since the 5th century, it was in Luther's Bible of 1534 that the Apocrypha was first published as a separate intertestamental section. To this date, the Apocrypha is included in the lectionaries of Anglican and Lutheran churches. Moreover, the Revised Common Lectionary, in use by most mainline Protestants, including Methodists and Moravians, lists readings from the Apocrypha in the liturgical calendar, although the alternate Old Testament scripture lessons are provided.
Most of us agree that the King James Version of the Bible is canon. Let's read what the Wikipedia says about the King James Bible underneath the heading of the King James Version. The English language King James Version of 1611 followed the lead of the Luther Bible in using an intertestamental section labeled books called Apocrypha, or just Apocrypha, at the running page header. The King James Version followed the Geneva Bible of 1560 almost exactly. The names of the books mentioned are the 14 books of the Apocrypha.
Now let's read the first paragraph under the Modern Edition section of Wikipedia. All King James Bibles published before 1666 included the Apocrypha, though separately to denote them as not equal to Scripture proper, as noted by Jerome in the Vulgate, to which he gave the name the Apocrypha. In 1826, the National Bible Society of Scotland petitioned the British and Foreign Bible Society not to print the Apocrypha, resulting in a decision that no BFBS funds were to pay for printing any apocryphal books anymore. Since that time, most modern editions of the Bible and reprintings of the King James Bible omit the Apocrypha section. In the 18th century, the Apocrypha section was omitted from the Challoner revision of the Douay Rheims version. In the 1979 revision of the Vulgate, the section was dropped. Modern reprintings of the Clementine Vulgate commonly omit the Apocrypha section. Many reprintings of older versions of the Bible now omit the Apocrypha, and many newer translations and revisions have never included them at all. The Apocrypha was removed from the Bible. This is a violation of God's commandment in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 32. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 32. What things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25 prophesied that this would be done. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times, and the dividing of time. The Apocrypha has been removed from some Bibles. The violation didn't stop there. Translations have been purposefully done incorrectly to make people now not know who the people of the scriptures are today. 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verses 47 through 48 talks about how this was done in the past during the Greek captivity.
1 Maccabees chapter 3, verse 47 and 48. Then they fasted that day, and put on sackcloth, and cast ashes upon their heads, and rent their clothes, and laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. It was done again because there is nothing new under the sun. There are still changes being made to the Bible today. The New International Version of the Bible has removed precepts that were given to prove other points in the scriptures. Remember, what we explained in the last video about precept must be upon precept to get the biblical understanding? During the time of Ezra, in the Persian and Greek captivity, many books of the Bible were accessible to people openly. There were a few books that were given to an elect group of people. Nothing is new under the sun. I'll now read 2 Esdras 14 verses 44 through 48. And it reads, "In 40 days they wrote 204 books. And it came to pass, when the 40 days were filled, that the highest spake, saying, The first that thou hast written, publish openly, that the worthy and unworthy may read it. But keep the 70 last, that thou mayest deliver to them, only to such as be wise among the people. For in them is the spring of understanding, the fountain of wisdom, and the stream of knowledge. And I did so."
Let's further prove that the Apocrypha is part of the Bible by examining the Feast of Dedication. The New Testament mentions a holy feast that Christ attended that appears to not have its origin mentioned in the Old and New Testament. The Feast of Dedication is a holy day that takes place after Israelites, under the command of Judas, during the time of the Greeks ruling, defeated Gorgias with his army and Lysias and his army, and then cleansed and dedicated the sanctuary in Zion. The time period of the Greeks ruling are referenced in the following Old Testament scriptures. Daniel chapter 8 verses 13 and 14. Verse 14 refers to the Feast of Dedication. There are more precepts about the time period of the Greeks ruling. Daniel chapters 2, 7, 8, 11, and 12 are some of the precepts. We are going to prove where this holy day originated. In another video, if it is the Lord's will, we will give a breakdown about the multifold meanings of the scriptures about the Feast of Dedication. This series of videos about the Apocrypha is just about proving that the Apocrypha is canon. Let's read the New Testament scripture about Christ attending the Feast of Dedication.
The book of John, chapter 10, verse 22 and 23. "And it was at Jerusalem the feast of the dedication, and it was winter. And Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch."
The Feast of Dedication isn't mentioned in Leviticus chapter 23 and Esther chapter 9 with the other holy days. The origin of the Feast of Dedication is claimed to be mentioned in 1 Maccabees chapter 4, which is in the Apocrypha. Let's read the scripture.
1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 59. "Moreover, Judas and his brethren with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year, by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month Caslu, with myrrh and gladness. At that time also they builded up the Mount Sion with high walls and strong towers round about, lest the Gentiles should come and tread it down as they had done before. And they set their garrison to keep it, and fortified Bethsura to preserve it, that the people might have a defense against Idumea."
The altar was made according to the law. This is proven in 1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 47. Exodus chapter 27, verses 1 through 8, and Exodus chapter 38, verses 1 through 8 reveal how the altar was made. Sacrifices were offered according to the law. 1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 53 proves this. Let's read the precept. 1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 53. "And offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made." Let's examine the word dedication from the Feast of Dedication by using precepts to find out if this feast took place in the Old Testament. Let's read precepts from 1 Maccabees chapter 4 that have a variation of the word dedication.
First Maccabees chapter 4, starting at 51. Furthermore, they set the loaves upon the table, and spread out the veils, and finished all the works which they had begun to make. Now on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called the month of Caslu, in the 140th and 88th year, they rose up betimes in the morning, and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the altar of burnt offerings, which they had made. Look at what time and what day the heathen had profaned it, even in that was it dedicated with songs and citherns and harps and cymbals. Verse 56. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, and offered burnt offerings with gladness and sacrifice, the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. Verse 59. And that reads, Moreover, Judas and his brethren with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year, by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month of Caslu, with myrrh and gladness.
Now let's read Numbers chapter 11, verses 1, 11, 84, and 88.
Actually, we're going to read Numbers chapter 7. Numbers chapter 7, starting at verse 1, it reads, And it came to pass on the day that Moses had fully set up the tabernacle, and had anointed it, and sanctified it, and all the instruments thereof, both the altar and all the vessels thereof, and had anointed them, and sanctified them. Skipping down to verse 11, And the Lord said unto Moses, They shall offer their offerings, each prince on his day, for the dedicating of the altar. Let's go to verse 84. And it reads, This was the dedication of the altar in the day when it was anointed by the princes of Israel. 12 chargers of silver, 12 silver bowls, 12 spoons of gold. Now let's check out verse 88. And all the oxen for the sacrifice of the peace offerings were 24 bullocks, the rams 60, the he-goats 60, the lambs of the first year 60. This was the dedication of the altar after that it was anointed.
These scriptures reveal that the Feast of Dedication is a law mentioned in the book of Numbers. It is a law about dedicating the altar. The whole chapter 7 of the book of Numbers reveals how the sacrifices were offered. Please read all of Numbers chapter 7 to get more understanding about how the sacrifices were offered. 2 Maccabees chapter 1 backs up the precepts about dedication. Let's examine 2 words that mean dedication. Focus on how the word purification is used to replace dedication in the first scripture.
2 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 18. Therefore, whereas we are now purposed to keep the purification of the temple upon the 25th day of the month of Caslu, we thought it necessary to certify you thereof, that ye also might keep it, as the feast of the tabernacles and of the fire which was given us when Nehemiah offered sacrifice after that he had builded the temple and the altar.
This precept not only reveals that purification means the same thing as dedication, but also that Nehemiah kept the Feast of Dedication too. The details of how he and other Israelites kept the feast are mentioned throughout 2 Maccabees chapter 1. Let's find out what Nehemiah called the feast.
2 Maccabees chapter 1 verse 36. And Nehemiah called this thing Naphthar, which is as much as to say a cleansing, but many men called it Nephi.
Cleansing, purification, and dedication are all referring to the same thing. Now let's find out if this feast is mentioned before Numbers chapter 7.
Exodus chapter 40, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, and we'll skip to verse 10. Verse 10 reads, And thou shalt anoint the altar of the burnt offering, and all his vessels, and sanctify the altar, and it shall be an altar most holy. Now verses 29 through 33. And he put the altar of burnt offering by the door of the tabernacle of the tent of the congregation, and offered upon it the burnt offering and the meat offering, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he set a laver between the tent of the congregation and the altar, and put water there to wash withal. And Moses and Aaron and his sons washed their hands and their feet thereat. When they went into the tent of the congregation, and when they came near unto the altar, they washed as the Lord commanded Moses. And he reared up the court round about the tabernacle and the altar, and set up the hanging of the court gate. So Moses finished the work.
We can go even further back. Genesis chapter 8 verses 20 and 21 mentions when Noah built an altar and offered burnt offerings.
Genesis chapter 8 verse 20. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living, as I have done.
Genesis chapter 4 verses 3 and 4 mentions when Cain and Abel made offerings, and Genesis chapter 3 verse 21 mentions when the Lord made an offering for Adam and Eve. The coats of skins is a similitude for an acceptable offering. This is proven by using the similitudes mentioned in both verses, Genesis chapter 3 verse 7 and Genesis chapter 4 verses 3 and 4, of what type of offering the Lord wouldn't accept. Genesis chapter 3 verse 7. And the eyes of them both were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Genesis chapter 4 verses 3 and 4. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Verse 5. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect, and Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. The feast of dedication originated in the Old Testament. Let us say this: you do not have to keep the literal representation of sacrifice anymore. Hebrews chapter 10 verses 8 through 14 proves that the holy feast can be kept without making literal sacrifices. You can keep the feast the different ways, according to Colossians chapter 2 verse 16.
Colossians chapter 2 verse 16. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days.
Although this video dealt with the Feast of Dedication, in the future we are going to deal with different subjects that further prove the validity of the Apocrypha.